Welcome to T-SMAC, home of the T-SMAC. May I take your order?
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Talking SMAC, where we talk superheroes, movies, animation, comics, and much, much more. I'm your host, Josh Scar. Alex has the week off. I don't think he wanted to subject himself to the horror that is Venom 3. I know I say I don't like scary movies, but I think he made the right decision on avoiding this one. So I am joined by the biggest Venom lover I know that is not named Scotty. It's Matt. Matt, how you doing?
Gooey as hell, and I got a tongue that won't quit.
What that tongue do? It won't quit is what it do. We are here to talk Venom 3, but we obviously have to get to a promo. But Matt, it's been a while. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. How about you?
I can't complain other than yesterday. I went from literal dawn till dusk yesterday, and we were supposed to record yesterday. But by the end of the day, I had a splitting headache. The two oldest girls had cross-country meets, and Ricky volunteered to help out with trophy and medal handout. So we were there from 9 a.m. till 1 p.m. Having to deal with kids who just ran 2.5 and 4 miles. And they wanted to play, but they were hungry, but they were thirsty, but they wanted to play, but they were hungry and they needed to move, but they were tired. And they just ran the gauntlet of everything kids do. And by the time we got home and had everyone eat and fed and like properly hydrated, it was already like 6 o'clock. And I was probably more dehydrated than anyone at that point because I was too busy taking care of everyone.
This is why I choose to be a deadbeat dad.
I can see the appeal to it. The Catholic guilt in me, being raised Catholic, I can't not pull my weight. Although I guess that's not the proper Catholic guilt, because aren't Catholic dads basically just there to provide the seed and walk away and provide?
Yeah, that's what you're supposed to do. I'm just kidding. I'm a very attentive father. I like to think.
I've seen the pictures. I think you're a pretty good dad.
Oh shucks.
Although pictures can very easily be staged, so I'm a little sus at the same time.
Yeah, that's true. You can't tell.
Can't trust anything you see on the internet.
Yeah.
Especially the Venom 3 trailer.
I don't know if I got a very, very different impression of that movie before seeing it.
I'm definitely very interested to get your thoughts, because I think you have a very good outlook on the Venom movies, especially more than I do, because going back to 2017 when this podcast started, back in the late summer 2017 going into 2018 when the first Venom was coming out that October in 2018, that was kind of the movie I was anchoring this podcast to, because I was just like, there's no fucking way this is going to be good. If this is good, I will end the podcast. And then I ended up ending the podcast anyway, because I started school and I had a newborn kid. So there was too much juggling to do. And then we're back. And I figured I needed to see one of these movies in theaters. And that turns out to be Venom 3 of all the movies. How the hell did this series get a sequel or a threequel?
Possibly a fourquel. We'll see. We'll talk about that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we definitely need to talk about that. But before we really dive into the weeds on all of this, we're going to go hear from our friends over at I Hate It, Let's Watch It. We'll be right back.
Hi everyone, I'm Lisa.
And I'm Dawn.
And if you've ever watched a TV show and thought to yourself, oh my god, that season finale plot twist was absolutely bonkers.
Or seen a movie and thought, wow, I need to talk to somebody about this train wreck immediately.
Then we think you'll fit right in with our podcast, I Hate It, Let's Watch It. We watch TV shows like Riverdale and Emily in Paris.
And movies like Deep Water, Killer Sofa, Rubber, and Deadly Illusions. And we give them the total rinsing they deserve.
It's basically group therapy for movie masochists. So come check us out wherever you stream podcasts.
Riverdale's good. I'm sorry.
The most useless piece of trivia I think I still have in my brain right now that at least comes to mind after that promo is that the creator of Emily in Paris did not realize that Americans pronounce it Paris, because it was supposed to be pronounced Emily in Paris.
Yeah. So was the creator not American, or are they just a snob?
I don't know. I just know that I think maybe they just intended for it to be called Emily in Perry, and everyone was just like, it's Paris.
But
we're Americans, we know how to speak.
Maybe this is my American centricness showing, but it's Paris, right? Like that's how it's actually pronounced.
I believe the French call it Perry, or maybe it's maybe it's more like how we call Chicago the Windy City occasionally. Maybe Perry is just that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I guess.
But I mean, I live in Illinois, but there are some people that call it Illinois.
Right.
So who knows? But I always think of that little factoid whenever I hear that promo or whenever someone starts talking about Emily in Paris. I'm always like, it's supposed to be pronounced Emily in Perry, and the creator hates the fact that no one calls it that. And isn't she going to Rome in the next season?
I think it has become an international incident because I think
that's one way to call it.
French President Emmanuel Macron is like, she can't go to Rome. Please stay in Paris. Stay in Paris. Like there's news articles about this.
Interesting. We're gonna have to do a deep dive into the lore of Emily in Paris now, I guess.
Yeah. When's the next hole in your schedule? Do a binge watch?
Not till January, but I maybe I'll just bring Ricky on and she can run me through it. I'm not gonna watch it. So, oh man, it's been 5 seconds since we went to the other side of the promo, and I still have no idea how this franchise is off the ground.
Well, what if we start? Where are you at with the Venom movies? Venom is a character too, and the Venom movies before this.
I'm very indifferent to Venom as a character. Like it obviously peaked in the 90s with his introduction, the black suit Spider-Man and all that. And then it's just kind of been diminishing returns because all they can do is add more lore to the character, and it just kind of makes things less interesting.
Yeah, I'm honestly, I know you said differently earlier, but I'm kind of in a similar boat with the comics where I think Venom can be a really interesting like Spider-Man villain, and also the more you try to build out his own, he becomes so popular that he starts getting his own book in the 90s, like you said, and then you sort of have to start building out his own cosmology outside of Spider-Man, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that I'm much less interested in, generally speaking. Although some of the more recent stuff, like there's a currently running Venom series by Al Ewing, who's like one of the best writers out there, and that shit cooks.
Well, it's like, Al Ewing. It's hard not to.
Exactly. But like some of the stuff that this movie is pulling from, it is stuff from recent years, and I think that's pretty cool. And like, this is like this is like raw as hell kind of way. More than, I don't know if it's good, but I'm like, this is like Venom fighting, a giant monster god with bat wings. That's badass, right? So it's interesting because on that metric, and I think the thing that I think it sort of has the thing where, Sony's doing all these kinds of movies where like Morbius and Madam Web and Kraven, the Spider-Man movies that don't have Spider-Man in them, right? So I think because I'm not that interested in Venom outside of Spider-Man, and because it's totally divorced, these movies are a pretty hard sell for me. Like I didn't see the first movie until like a year later when it was on streaming, or it was like really cheap on digital rental or something, and I had a free night, and I was like, oh yeah, okay, I'll check it out, and was like surprised at how fun I thought that first movie was.
Yeah, definitely. It's not good, but it's fun.
Yeah. And I think the same thing kind of happened with me with the second one about a year after it came out. I just happened to be home alone, and I was like, yeah, whatever. It's out on digital now, and I didn't like that one quite as much. It still had some of the stuff that I liked in the first one, but overall, I thought it was a big step down. And we can talk about where the third one lands, but that's sort of where I'm at with Venom and the movies kind of going into this one.
It's definitely hard for me to disagree with anything you just said. And like I said, the first one especially is a fun bad.
Yeah.
And not in the same sense that like The Room is a fun bad. It's like, it's a genuine effort. There's obviously some thought put into it. But what's fascinating about any of these movies is that they have been edited to hell, and you can kind of see the studio interference involved with them. And you can tell they wanted to pad it out more. Like they wanted like a 2 hour and 20-minute movie, 2 hour and 30-minute movie. And then they just cut them all down to like 2 hours or less. This one, I think, was like 105 minutes.
Yeah.
I think you can really tell in in Venom 3 especially, and Venom 2 for that matter. I remember I watched Venom, the first Venom, July 2020, because we were in lockdown, but Ricky and her family took the girls and went to go visit some extended family in upstate New York. And so I was home alone, so I had nothing better to do. I think I watched the 4-hour Justice League movie at that point.
That was also
what I had nothing else to do, and I was like, I can only avoid this for so long. Let's live tweet my experience watching Venom.
2020 was a weird time. Yeah, that was a thing. Also, it was, I think, the weekend that it came out, the Justice League. To go on a tangent, I think it was a week that my now wife was like, I know things are crazy. I know it's risky, but like I got to go see my family just for a weekend. And I was like, all right, we'll roll those dice. And I just happened to be home alone the night it came out. So I was like, well, I can't do anything else. So I guess I'll just sit here I get off work early, sit here for 4 hours.
I think I still ended up piecemealing that for in 90-minute increments. Like I couldn't sit there for 4 hours at home.
I was like, I'm doing it. I ordered some terrible food and went for it.
Yeah. The only reason I think I saw Let There Be Carnage is I think it was on Stars. It wasn't even on like a normal platform, but Ricky had really gotten into Outlander. Sure. And I was out of state, and I was at the airport getting ready to come home, and I was on the airport Wi-Fi, and I was like, all right, let's watch this while I have 3 hours to kill before my flight.
Maybe the best way to watch it, honestly.
The way God intended, on a tablet in the airport. Like I had mentioned, I feel like this one, I owed it to the franchise to see this one in theaters and see it in a timely fashion, just because, like I said, with us still doing the podcast and having timely episodes with certain blockbusters or hopeful blockbusters, Venom was kind of an anchor for me. And like, this is one of the reasons why I'm doing this podcast, because I want to shit on this movie so bad. And weirdly enough, like I can't shit too badly on the first one, other than it's a very by the numbers. Like if it came out in like 2006 or 2009, it would have been a fine superhero movie. Like it probably would have been pretty well regarded, but because it came out post Infinity War, it was like, oh, this is what they used to be like.
It is interesting. Like a lot of those Sony movies are sort of in that vein where before Iron Man comes out and then sort of starts the MCU as we understand it now, there was this period where a bunch of different studios had the rights to all these characters, so they would just like make a movie that is just focused on this character, which, the MCU is mostly that as well, but there's no hooks to the rest of the world, right? So, I don't know that if Venom had come out before Iron Man, if we wouldn't have gotten those Spider-Man hooks still, because they also had the rights to Spider-Man. But it's the kind of movie that was basically the entire genre before that, where the Fantastic Four movie comes out and it is just the Fantastic Four, and there's no sense that there's a wider world, except possibly as an in-joke or just a thrown-off reference, right? So it's weird,
like Doctor Strange in the first Spider-Man movie.
Yeah, so it's like interesting and weird that like in some ways the Sony specific movies are like, they're just doing what they've always done. They're just doing the superhero movies as they've always existed, weirdly.
Yeah, Avi and Amy Pascal, those two just refuse to grow anything within their side of the industry, and it shows.
Speaking of that, this is a total tangent, but I was in the theater and I almost laughed out loud because I'm sitting through and waiting for to see if there's any credit scenes, right? Mm-hmm. And then the Arad Productions logo comes up, and it is straight up just the Raimi Spider-Man font. And I was like, you know where your bread's buttered, man. I appreciate it.
Avi Arad's been running Spider-Man stuff since the 90s. Like he had a hand in producing the Spider-Man animated series. Yep. And more power to him. He's been doing this for 30 years, but at some point you feel like someone needs to tell him he's lost touch and he needs to just step away. But he's got his hooks in there and he's not stepping away anytime soon, it seems.
So I guess should we do a quick rundown of what this movie is? If someone hasn't heard of it or hasn't seen it, we don't have to do a beat by beat, but the elevator pitch.
I mean, if you want to go for it, go for it. I don't know that we can do much without spoiling it. So I'm going to say let's go full spoilers, just because I think if you've seen the trailers, you've got a general idea of what's going on. But I don't know that you can talk too much about the movie beyond very, very broad strokes without going much deeper, which, I mean, that's like going into a zero depth pool and just stepping in on the first inch.
I'll try and give like a really quick synopsis, and then from there, without spoiling too much, but then from there, we should just unleash the beast, right?
Yeah, but I will say before you get into it, sorry, this movie does... I was kind of insulted that this movie expected me to remember anything from the last movie.
We'll get to that.
It relatively opens with you needing to remember the names of certain people from the previous Venom movie.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, was he there? I don't remember this guy at all.
So Venom, The Last Dance, is basically Eddie Brock and Venom are effectively on the run because for various reasons they are wanted by basically everybody. They're wanted for crimes based on the events of the second movie, and then the U.S. government is trying to hunt them down because of a big threat that is coming in the form of this character Knull, who is the sort of god of symbiotes, who is trapped in the homeworld of the symbiotes and is like sending his agents out to try and capture Eddie Brock, because it turns out Venom is the key to his escape, and the only way to stop him, as far as they know, is for Venom to die. So the United States government's after him to try and capture him, possibly kill him. Meanwhile, these monsters from another world are chasing them down, and that is just the basic setup. Hijinks ensue, wacky things happen, Venom becomes a horse, etc., etc. And you know, I don't know if that's particularly good synopsis, but like that's the log line.
That's the basic crux of the main plot of the film. Yeah,
and we'll jump into spoilers from here, I guess.
Yeah, and first thing I have to say is this is a Transformers ass movie because it's alien invasion. We need to get the MacGuffin. We need to keep the MacGuffin from the bad guy. Like that's every Transformers movie, every live action Transformers movie in a nutshell, and that's this movie to a T as well. I think it's a middling Transformers movie. If I'm going to keep up the analogy, I think it's fine. It's obviously better than like whatever the second one is. And then also like Age of Extinction and whatever the last Mark Wahlberg one is, The Last Night. Like it's better than those at the very least. By how much, I think it has more to do with the runtime than the actual content. But I think one thing I want to bring up really quickly with you, Matt, because I think this is where my biggest gripe with the film is. You put these movies very succinctly as it's a romance, it's a buddy romance, a buddy comedy, whatever you want to call it, between Eddie and the symbiote.
Yeah.
And I think this movie kind of fails at that. It lingers too much on people having a previous experience with these characters, and it doesn't rely enough to rebuild that relationship for anyone coming into this movie for the first time.
I think that is not off base. It's definitely there at certain points, right? The end of this movie is literally a sad montage.
It's a Fast 7 montage of Eddie and Venom.
Yeah, it's like a thing that would happen in a sad, like a romantic tragedy, where one half of the couple dies, and then the surviving one is remembering all the wonderful times they had together. So like there are definitely times when they touch on it, but it is like sort of the heart of the first movie, especially, and then it's something that I think one of the things the second movie does really well is also anchor the movie in that, right? And
it's a comedy breakup movie.
Yeah, and I think, like you say, it is much more. This one is much more
it's relying on them telling us how close they are rather than showing us, because like it feels like every scene or every other scene Eddie's just like, we've come a long way, buddy. This could be the end of the road, buddy. And then Venom says something sweet or just kind of like reaffirms that Eddie deserves more, and it's nice. But for someone who hasn't seen one of these movies in 3+ years, I don't know, when did Let There Be Carnage come out? Has it only been 2 years? I don't even know. I think
1 or 2 or 3. Yeah,
I think it was 2021 or 2022. It wasn't last year. I think it was 2021. But again, even then, it's been 3 years, and only the people who have like stuck through this franchise for the last 7-8 years, 6 years, I guess, they would be the ones that are buying into this relationship. But for someone like me who's not entirely attached to this, or again, if you're bringing mom, dad, that you're like, oh, there's a Venom movie, there's a new superhero movie, what is this about? There's not a lot of really good emotional beats between Eddie and Venom that feel natural, because again, it's too busy telling us like, oh, they are best friends. They're telling us this, but they're never showing us this, because every other time they're just arguing or they're not quite on par with each other. I think my favorite part of anything they were doing together was when the what is it called, the xenophage?
Yes.
Yeah, because I remember thinking like xenophage sounds way too much like xenomorph, which I'm sure there's some kind of etymology attached to it. But the moment after the first time they encounter the xenophage, Venom's just like doing his tentacle head thing from Eddie's back, and he's just kind of like looking around like, huh? He's just looking around while expositing to Eddie. And I thought that was super cute. It was really fun, because Venom's just like, is there more? What's coming? Where's that? Who's what? And I loved that. That was super cute. And it kind of gave Venom this like childish charm that he's had previously. Like in Let There Be Carnage, he had chickens that he like loved and was very attached to. The first movie, they kind of get you to root for him because he's kind of the lower tier symbiotes. He's like, they consider me a loser on my planet. I'm not that great, but here I'm a 9-foot monster that can beat shit up. I'm cool here. So they do a good job previously of getting all that set up. And I think that's like the only time in this movie where I was like, yeah, Venom's all right. I like him.
Yeah, and I think, it's one of those things where on the one hand, I think you can expect a certain level of knowledge coming in, right? Because it's the third movie. I get that. But also there's a sense that, like, because that's not as much of a focus on the movie, it feels like the magic is lost, right? Where, you don't need to necessarily work as hard to establish that for people, but that was the heart of those first two movies, and it's not really here in this one as much. So I think in the most generous reading, if I'm giving them that slack of like, okay, it's the third movie, you don't feel like you need to hit that beat as hard, that's a beat worth hitting, because that's the thing that the movie it's the hook is, right? So I think you lose something by not. And I think that what they have instead, which I think is a lot of the like lore stuff and the Juno Temple character, her backstory, I think a lot of it is not. I
have notes about Juno Temple's character.
Yeah, I think what they have there instead is not as good. Instead, we get like a weird 3-beat about whether or not Eddie Brock is going to wear shoes, right?
Yeah, which that makes no sense, because in almost any other form of Venom media, the symbiote can just like make clothing for someone. So like, even if it was just, they established early on that as long as he doesn't become fully formed Venom while attached to Eddie, the xenophage can't find them and get the codex, the MacGuffin that would allow them to release Knull. So like, why can't Eddie just walk around in Venom feet? But or
curious.
why can't he make him Venom Crocs?
Right. I'm wondering now, because this maybe we can get into the character stuff that you were talking about before, but I am wondering if this is just a thing they have not done much in the previous movies, or if they have or not. I genuinely don't remember, because another thing that happens in this movie is there's a whole small little bit about having to get new clothes to get into the casino, right? Sometimes you gotta kind of fudge the rules a little bit so you can have a scene, have a little joke, whatever, right? But that's a thing where, depending on the version of Venom you're talking about, he could just turn into a suit instead of having
we see it in the Spider-Man 2 video game. We see it in the animated series. Obviously, it's probably been done in the comics.
Yeah, so he doesn't have to like do that little joke where he gets his feet pissed on or whatever. So that's the thing where I'm trying to think. I don't remember these movies well enough. Does that happen in the previous two movies, or is this just like a version of Venom where they never have to address that at all?
I don't think they've done it. I can't say that I remember, but I also don't know that they've written themselves into that hole.
Right.
Or that scenario, so they've never had to address it. So I think it's maybe more just they went, we've never done this before, we don't want to set it up now, so let's just do this, which I will let them get away with that, because even if they wanted to somewhat justify it, like saying like, oh, even though I'm not Venom, I am engulfing your body, and that would do a thing.
Right.
Like, there's minor rule tweaks that they can do, because the guy who ends up pissing on Eddie's feet is actually Tom Hardy's stunt double.
Oh.
It's a fun little cameo for that guy. So like, I can see why they would have done that to kind of give that guy a little screen time and a little moment with Tom Hardy. But I think it is kind of weird that they never established that, but they've also never really allowed themselves the opportunity to.
Sure.
Because they've always just kind of been too embedded in the Venom lore after the first movie, because they're like, okay, well, we got to go do Carnage, and this is going to be more of a Carnage movie than a Venom movie, but we're going to do the fun breakup storyline there. And then the first movie is all about the origin, setting up the rules, which obviously that's where you would set up the whole, I can change your clothes if the scenario calls for it, but they never gave him that opportunity.
Maybe they just really were, they were like, you know what? Sometimes you just really want a piss joke and a joke about wearing cowboy boots and like smelly hippie shoes. Then that is worth sacrificing this other thing for. Let's go with God, go with Knull, right?
Yeah. So let's talk about Juno Temple here really quick before we get back into Eddie and Venom and their journey. That's a character that never existed before this movie started filming. There's so much expositing going on with her and just like very surface level nonsense where she's just telling people the same shit if she existed prior to this movie that she has told them 100 times. Like, okay, she has nightmares that she killed her brother. She inadvertently killed her brother because they were both struck by lightning, and because they were holding hands, all the electricity passed through her and went to him or something. Like, okay, fine. But even to start, the fact that they never really explain that her left arm is just dead. We just see that there's scarring going on there. I was like, okay, she's got a scar, but then she's like not doing anything with the arm for the rest of the movie. I'm like, can't you put it in a sling to let us know that it's immobilized? Like, just do something visually there to cue us in. No, that's too much. She's just never going to use her left arm and just leave it dangling there.
It's one of those things that I think in a better movie, in a movie that was like, I don't know, that did not feel so slapdash, I would appreciate as a thing that is like, they're letting me figure that out, right? But I think also one of those movies might maybe even draw some more subtle attention to it, even if it was just framing her a certain way, right? Where we're here, it's she's such like a skeleton of a character who is barely anything. And then there's only a handful of times, and then once right at the very end of the movie, where you really notice that the arm is just kind of like hanging there, kind of limp. Mm-hmm. And it's really easy to miss. So like, I think for me, if I liked the movie more, or I thought it was better at kind of that storytelling, I would appreciate that subtlety. But because it is sort of as messy as it is, that feels messy also, right?
Yeah, you might be right. It could be a ripple effect from everything else leading up to that, because like I said, she's not even really a character. She's an embodiment of a motivation, I guess would be the right way to put it. She pretty much purely exists her whole reason for existing and doing what she does is because she feels guilty about her brother's death.
Right.
And it doesn't lead to anything as a character. Her brother was obsessed with aliens, wanted to work at Area 51. So she did that since he died. And there's nothing other than the sob story of having a dead sibling that carries over for her as a character to give her any agency beyond, I like aliens because my brother likes aliens. And there just so happens to be like 7 symbiotes just hanging out with us in this sub-cellar of Area 51.
Yeah, she's like, I mean, in her role in the movie is to be like the quote-unquote good side of the government organization, right? Where the
military bad, science good, that sort of thing.
Yeah, right. And she's also like the kind of person where, and I've been this person at various times in my life, where like if you were hanging out with her, you would be so exhausted so quickly, because it's like you're hanging out with her and she looks up at the stars and she goes, my brother likes stars or something. And you're like, yeah, I've known you for 10 years. Like, I know this about you.
That's what I'm saying is it's like, I love this analogy because it's a fun movie, but there's a moment early on in Good Burger where Ed's having the dream. It's literally the opening scene of the movie. He gets woken up by his clock and goes, a clock. And so does he just do that every morning? Like, I know it's a gag for the movie, but that implies he does it every damn morning. Same thing with this, where she's just like, my brother likes aliens. My brother wanted to be working in Area 51. It's like, we know, you told us. We have heard this story before. You've been here for, like you said, 10, 15 years.
It's like, it has the cadence of somebody who, like, the first time you learn about some big social thing, right, or political thing, like when you start to really look into that stuff as a young person, and then literally you start seeing it literally everywhere, in part because it is everywhere. Like, okay, like racism, right? I'm just learning about how pervasive racism is. So then all you fucking talk about is systemic racism, which is like not bad, but then comes a point where you realize, oh, this is all I talk about. But you gotta get over it, right? Like, it's an important thing. And then
not the racism, but like that's why we have this podcast, is because we talk about the comic book stuff so much. It's like, well, we need to get it out somehow, so let's just share it with the world.
But I guess to summarize, I think there's a degree to which when you first start to learn about something, people can become overzealous and overbearing with it, right? Where they find a way to work in every conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And then this reminds me of that, where she's like the kind of person who, no matter what the conversation is, she finds a way to
come back to her brother.
She finds a way to steer it. Where like they're like, her and her military counterpart are talking about the situation with Venom and what else is going on there, and the plot of the movie. And she's like, oh, because part of the movie is Area 51 is being decommissioned, right? And she's like, wow, my brother always wanted to work here, and who would have thought that I'm 50 feet below the ground or whatever, 100 miles below the ground, working just below Area 51, talking to the other guy who's like, yeah, I know this. We've been working side by side for years.
I will say they on a surface level, they do an okay job with not letting her become annoying. It's more when you just stop to think about, like I said, she's a character that didn't exist until the camera started rolling on her, and she doesn't exist when the cameras stop rolling, or she does exist. Yep. She stops existing when the cameras stop rolling, and then she exists again the next time she's on screen. I like Juno Temple's a wonderful actress. Like, she is extraordinarily charismatic, and to make her just this blank canvas, very obvious English accent, like putting on an American accent.
Yeah, I was going to say she's a wonderful actress when she's not forced to do a terrible American accent.
You could hear she's fighting so hard to make it sound okay, but like she loses any and all emotion with what she's doing. It's not great. But like that's all I wanted to say about her role. She exists purely to, like you said, be the other side of the government, to be the side that's like, well, what if they're good guys? Instead of, we should kill them all because we don't understand them. And then there's the one person whose defining personal trait is she wears a Christmas pin.
There's also a weird thing that I keep thinking about, where like one of the first times we see her is like she comes into the office or something and she sees Juno Temple's character from across the way, and she goes to talk and introduce herself to the movie. Like the characters know each other, but she does this weird thing, and the movie does a weird thing where she like changes her shoes and like puts her shoes up like in a little rack on her desk, and the camera gets like really close to it. At a certain point, like once Eddie is in the lab, right, where like once those have sort of converged, I idly thought, oh, that's like the payoff to the stupid fucking shoe thing. It's not. There's just a weird shot of her shoes.
And that's what I'm saying, where these movies are edited to hell, is because there probably was some kind of payoff intended for that. Like, there's no other reason to have that shot other than the fact that we've got a subplot where Eddie just continually loses shoes.
Yeah, or I was like, okay, at some point, like a sample of one of the symbiotes is going to get out, and we're going to see it crawling over her shoes or something, and then she's going to get infected. Also does not happen. Just an extremely weird shot. And yeah, like you said, it is just edited to hell.
So for a 100-minute movie, this movie does so many things that, like I said, you can tell they wanted to make this like a 2-hour and 30-minute movie, but then they realized like, oh, we're going to Amazing Spider-Man 2 this thing, and we can't do that again. Because the movie starts with Knull narrating, doing a Thanos style or the other style narration of like his circumstance, and the other being the guy with the extra thumb in Avengers, the guy who narrates over the image of the Tesseract, for those that are not in the know. But Knull's just like sending out his xenophages across the universe, which I assume they were just going to Earth because it apparently it's a thing that he's awake now. And I would think he knows where to go, but he's also a little bit of dark side. So he doesn't quite know where anything is. He just sends out his thralls wherever and whenever. So there's only one on Earth, and it's hunting Eddie and Venom down. But then the next thing we get is going back to Avengers. We have this like shadow organization within the government that is directing Chiwetel Ejiofor's general, I think it's Rex Strickland. He's like, oh, we have to go find Eddie Brock and we have to go do a thing. It's like, oh, this is the council from Avengers. And this movie has so many different ideas and things that it's ripping off and aping and homaging maybe, that it has no real ideas of its own. It feels like it's a lot of setup, or they were trying to expand out, like I was saying, that maybe someone along the way went, no, we can't do Amazing Spider-Man 2 again. Because there's also a thing that Chiwetel Ejiofor's character does where he says, we need to send out the 6.
Yep.
And people who know Sony know that they have been trying to do a Sinister Six movie forever. So my initial thought was, is this like a preemptive Sinister Six thing? Or is it, I think at that point they had established that they have symbiotes. So like maybe they're like trying to weaponize the symbiotes with highly trained military people. I don't know. But there's like some sort of idea that like the 6 are supposed to be like this highly trained team. And they get killed pretty quickly, and like they seem pretty inept, other than the fact that they just are designated as a 6. Like I don't.
As far as I can tell, it just ends up being 6 military guys and head to toe gear, no faces whatsoever, like just generic guys you would
until Eddie has to kill one, and I think it's also like the only woman that works for the United States military in these movies.
Yeah, which is another thing that is like super weird, because it is framed as like this big turning point, and then they touch on it a little bit later, but it's like so much else. It's like nothing like in this movie. It's so weird. It's weightless, right? Where it feels like a moment that is going to like shape the rest of the arc, and it does not. And I'm also pretty sure, you're speaking of the shadowy government organization, I'm like 90% certain that like the guy standing in shadow in front of the screens is played by Reed Scott, who is credited as being in this movie and was in the previous 2 movies as Eddie's ex's current boyfriend. So I'm like, I was like, I watched and I was like, that guy's he's got the head shape. He's like a handsome white guy, so it could be anybody theoretically. I was like, he's got that kind of look, and also he kind of sounds like him. And I was like, oh, is there like they're gonna do like a reveal, or did I forget something about him working for some government or being recruited in the last movie?
Was he like a cop? I feel like
he is credited in this movie as Dr. Dan Lewis, who is the same character as the previous 2 movies. But I don't know if like he just was in this movie and got cut, or if like that is him. I was watching the movie and I was like, I'm pretty sure that is the same guy. But you never see his face, but you hear his voice like once or twice. And I was like, that sounds like that guy, because that guy's also in Veep, and I've seen a lot of Veep. So I was like, oh, I know that guy's voice.
I recognize that head shape.
Yeah, exactly.
You haven't been binging Venom on loop. Thank you.
Right. But it's a thing that also that kind of gets at maybe what I think the core problem is in this movie, which it kind of feels like half a movie, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know how much of that is by design, or like if it was edited to hell, like you said, where starting this movie and Knull shows up and is sending his guys off. I was not expecting that's the bad guy of the movie in terms of like the giant fucking monster, right?
Mm-hmm.
The only enemy in this movie is either one or several of the big monsters, and that's fine. I guess you could count the government too, whatever. But like the big monster that they fight at the end is the big monsters.
And that's the Transformers-ness of it too, is because there's a misunderstanding with the government, and then there's a bigger threat, and then everyone works together.
Yeah. But I was like surprised that like by the time we got to the movie, we mostly really just talked about Knull, who was like built up as like, this is the villain of the movie. So I don't know. It's just, and then you throw into that the weird characterization, the random references to like special military outfits, the big shadowy government organization that don't go anywhere. The sort of abrupt. We talk a lot in the movie about how the only way to stop Knull for sure is one or both of them being killed. But the sense is not, the movie's called Venom: The Last Dance. but there is not a sense throughout most of this movie that they're on borrowed time, that death might really be on the line, right?
They both seem pretty well set that like, yeah, we'll get through this somehow. We'll figure it out. And
yeah, there's like a few instances where somebody is like, the only way to kill them is the only way to stop this is to kill them, so we're going to try. But it's not until the very end that there is suddenly like, oh, it's time for the self-sacrifice. We're not going to make it out of this one, buddy. I don't know. It's just a weird thing where I don't know if they were going for like an Infinity War thing where like you do the first part of the movie and then you come back later and do the second part. But that movie, say what you want about the MCU at this point, but Infinity War felt like a complete movie in and of itself. It's just one that has a bad ending for the characters.
It's the Empire Strikes Back ending. Yeah, the bad guy wins.
And this one feels like they wrote either half a movie or 2 acts of a movie and then didn't do the part where like the actual bad guy we've been supposedly fearing this entire movie shows up.
So I told you before we recorded that I have a theory.
Yes.
That is a perfect segue for my theory. So
Let's hear it.
So the mid-credits scene of this movie is Knull doing a Thanos at the end of Avengers, where he's basically just like, oh, you're champions, blah, blah, blah. You've defeated me this time, but I'm coming for you and you're going to watch and blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't know if he's breaking the fourth wall or something, because it makes no sense contextually, but he's basically just saying like, I've been thwarted, but I'm not dead. I'm still here and I'm coming for you, even though he can't get out until he gets the codex. So like,
right.
Who the hell knows? But he's proclaiming to someone that he is there and everyone will watch him destroy the universe. I have said since the Dark Universe, since DC tried to do it, so many other studios have tried to create a shared universe and they've all failed. And part of that is because even though like Iron Man did it by one simple word by saying like the Avengers Initiative, or 2 simple words, I guess. But the idea of a shared universe is you're building towards something. Like, I don't know what Universal is trying to do with the Dark Universe. Like, who the fuck knows why the creature from the Black Lagoon, a mummy, a vampire, Van Helsing, and whoever else are all going to team up and like do something, or like, are they going to have like a big monster mash or something? Like, I don't know. And I think that's part of the reason why the Dark Universe failed is like, who the hell cares that Van Helsing exists alongside werewolves? Like, I mean, Van Helsing always exists along those lines, but like, who the hell cares that all these universal monsters exist in the same universe if it's not building towards something? With that mid-credits tease and the end credits tease where we see that the Venom symbiote, or like a child of the Venom symbiote, might be surviving alongside a cockroach, which also poor Danny Rojas in any multiverse having to deal with the shit he's dealing with. But there's a tease that Venom might not be dead based on like the very first scene of the movie going alongside the post-credits teaser. And we have 2 key elements in place. We have Knull's survival. He's still around. He's still awake. And the Codex presumably is still around because some form of Venom still exists. So my theory is that's what Sony's building towards with, or at least they intended to build towards with these Spider-Man adjacent films, is a Sinister Six, Suicide Squad, Thunderbolts, Avengers style film. You have Morbius, Vulture, Kraven, probably someone else, I don't know who, Madam Web, and Venom, who would probably pull like a Superman and Justice League style comeback, fighting Knull to thwart him away from their world, their universe. I think that's maybe what the movie is building towards. You have the shadow government, you have all these other things. We're building up this idea that, or Sony is building up this idea that they are aware of all these supernatural, superhuman people now, and they know that there's like extraterrestrial threats coming. That's where I think like they're teasing the 6, like I mentioned before. I mean, how do you improve upon 6 expendable people, calling them the 6 that are supposedly highly trained? You do the Sinister Six. 6 villains, anti-heroes. I mean, 5 villains, anti-heroes, and a blind woman with vague foresight powers. But I think that might be, if this was a longer movie and they had more Easter eggs built into it or more breadcrumbs built into it, I think that might be what they were building towards. And like that might, I don't know, but that is my theory that that's where they were going with it.
It's interesting because like, I don't think that's implausible, if only because I think Sony has proven, I think Sony really wants something like that to happen, right? Where
they've been trying for 10 plus years at this point.
Yeah. And like there was a certain point where it made sense because, you know, when the MCU was big and before it was in this patch where we don't really know if we're still gonna enjoy it anymore here and there. But like, it was the biggest thing in the world for at least a decade, so everybody goes for it. And Sony has Spider-Man, so they had like, it doesn't really make sense, but also it does make sense where it's like, yeah, of course, we're going to try and milk this thing for all it's worth. That's what the Amazing Spider-Man 2 thing you keep talking about is, where they do this movie that is also has a bunch of hooks for a bunch of other things. And we're talking about a bunch of villain
origin stories that are building towards Amazing Spider-Man 3, which would be Spider-Man versus the Sinister Six.
Yeah, and when that movie comes out, we're referencing that stuff in the movie. We're also talking about, they're going to do an Aunt May as as a nurse movie. They're going to do a Sinister Six movie. They're going to do a Black Cat movie, all that stuff. Anyway.
Ooh. So instead of, maybe Madam Web is running the Shadow Organization because she has her web of multiverse vision. And it was Black Cat and Silver Sable. That was going to be the team up movie.
Yeah.
So it's Kraven, Vulture, Morbius, Venom, Black Cat, Silver Sable. That's the team.
Well, and here's the weird thing about it, right? Because like, I think it's plausible, but also it's 2024, the end of 2024, and like Morbius and Madam Web like are not movies that I think that they will follow up on at this point, right? Like they're not going to get sequels. They're movies that totally.
Are you kidding, man? Morbius got a re-release. Like who would not have thought that movie was not a success?
People memed it back into theaters and it bombed again. So like that's the weird thing is if that is what they're doing. I'm not saying like I don't say this to say I think you're wrong, but like it would be insane because like I feel like maybe you feel like okay. Venom 3 is coming out next year. We got Madam Web, and we're going to start tying this stuff together. And then Madam Web bombs out the gate too. Why don't you take that scene out? I think that's the point where you start editing stuff out. And who knows how much any of this is on point for what they're actually trying to do. But if that were the case, I think it's plausible, but it would be insane. Absolutely.
That's the kind
insane.
of swing I'm asking for right now at this point with Hollywood. Like, good friend of the show, Adam Rose, was apparently a consultant on Kraven. I guess they brought him in, and if I'm remembering correctly with his Twitter, he had big insight on like the design of the Rhino and like how to implement him into the movie. Like that's super cool, and I hope we get a chance to talk to him about that after the movie comes out. But I'm just I know I'm taking a wild swing, and again, I think that's part of where some of these very obvious threads were cut out of the film, because I think like maybe like what you're saying, they had a little bit of hindsight where they're like, oh, well, everyone hated Madam Web and Morbius, so we can't tease this stuff.
So maybe like it's a thing where it's not that they chopped out the third act or cut a bunch of stuff. It's that that they did cut a bunch of stuff, but that stuff was maybe more heavily tying into this potential
to the connected universe. Yeah.
Sony Spider-Verse. Yeah, I could see that too. And it's so funny that, that Vulture shit from the end of Morbius, they literally neither side of that divide will ever mention that again. Literally, like nobody's ever going to do anything with that ever again. I guarantee it.
I am very curious to know if Michael Keaton's Vulture ever returns to the MCU, just if they say anything. Because I very distinctly remember when Chris Pratt was cast as Star-Lord, and I was like, I wonder how they're going to address him getting all beefy for his role in Guardians of the Galaxy. And you're like, I don't think they're going to talk. They're not going to mention it. Like, why would they mention it? And then sure enough, the very first episode, they go off to London, and Andy and Adam Scott's character, I'm forgetting it, Ben, Andy and Ben are like walking up the steps in London, and they're like, you just stopped drinking beer? He's like, yeah. How much beer were you drinking? I know, right?
Look,
I texted you immediately.
A very funny joke, not that far off from a thing that actually happened to me. So who knows, right?
But that's my theory on maybe why this movie was very clearly edited to hell. And also I think that's maybe where this movie was going, and where they were trying to get you to have a feel. Like, it tried to do the Batman v Superman ending a little better, but it lost a big chunk of the emotion because they had to cut out so much of the movie.
I mean, I think they could easily follow up on this, just do it in like a Venom 4 or something, right? But it's a thing where the movie is not reviewing very well. I don't know how well it's doing financially. So like, or even if regardless of any of that, even if Tom Hardy would be interested in coming back, right? So maybe it's a thing that It's just such a weird thing where, there's post-credit scenes because these movies have post-credit scenes.
Holy fuck. Sorry.
But, okay, all right.
It opened to 51 million domestically, which is like, that's fine for modern domestic releases, really. But it made 124 million internationally with a total of 175 million worldwide.
All right.
That's insane.
Venom 4 Supremacy. Or we'll do a Misery spinoff starring Juno Temple or something,
That's so insane. I was going to pull up the review scores here. Let There Be Carnage, Venom, Last Dance. So Venom reviewed at 30% tomato meter score, which 30% approval rating essentially. Let There Be Carnage was 57%.
Wow, okay.
So, and this one rates 37%. So it has a higher approval rating than the first Venom movie, which we both say is the best one.
Is this like an aggregate of, is this like the professional?
Yes.
Or is it like an aggregate of the fans? Or
the audience score is pretty set at about 80 to 85.
Gotcha. Okay. But it's not like an average of the two or something.
No. Venom.
Gotcha.
Venom 1, 30. Venom 2, 57. Venom 3, 37.
That's fascinating to me. That's so interesting.
Let There Be Carnage finished with a $506 million, basically $507 million worldwide at the box office. The first Venom made bank. That one made $856 million.
Well, that's why there's 3 movies.
Yeah. 506 for a 2021 release is not bad.
Yeah.
That we're still mid-pandemic at that point. We'll see what the drop-off is for this, but that initial 175 is nothing to scoff at. What was the budget here? Venom 3 budget. Roughly 120 million, or an estimated 120. It might at least make its money back, plus whatever digital release money they get. That is impressive. I didn't expect it to make that much money domestically, especially.
Yeah. People like these movies. People like Venom. There is a reason that dude got had an almost immediate face turn after showing up in the 80s.
That's a great point.
People fucking love Venom for whatever reason. But, you were talking about your theory of possibly why this movie was so edited to hell and possibly chopped up, which sort of reminds me of, again, maybe this is me not remembering these movies because I've seen each one of the first 2 once, and then it's been years, right? But, I don't know, it feels very like a very casual thing to be like, oh yeah, we have 6 symbiotes in this facility. And I'm like, is that a thing? Did they mention in a previous movie that a bunch of them showed up and now we're following up on that? And here's the part where I'm a dummy. Or maybe it's just that the movie slides off your brain so easily. Where
I think it's more that one.
When Stephen Graham's character shows up and he's in the cell and he's talking about all this stuff that's happening, I'm like, who the fuck is that guy? Even though, he is established as, this is the guy that died in the second movie, right in the start of the movie. So...
yeah, I didn't remember that at all.
That's the thing where you were talking about, where this movie expects you... It really just picks up, basically, right from...
I think the synopsis says it's, 6 days after the events of Venom 2.
Yeah, it picks up, right after the second movie, and also right after the last Spider-Man movie, because the gag there is him traveling the multiverse. But that's the thing that sort of mystified me, was that either they expected me to remember that, oh, by the way, the government just has a bunch of symbiotes, or they were just they just dashed off in a line of dialogue, oh, by the way, we just have a bunch of these guys, and here's a quick flashback that shows them showing up, right? It's just it all gets back to how this movie just feels really slapped together.
I chalked that one up too, because this movie is just a bunch of superhero studio tropes at this point. I think this is the Fox X-Men version of it, where they just are trust us. The last movie doesn't entirely matter other than the things we say that matter. Just enjoy this one for what it is. And I think that's kind of where they're oh yeah, by the way, there's 6, 7, 8 symbiotes just hanging out in the bunker of Area 51. We're running experiments on them to see if we can't tame them, maybe, but it's all vague and not fully mentioned. And then we're going to bring this guy back with what this symbiote that has a tail, like it doesn't have legs. It's got a really long tail and floats around like it has no gravity.
And I think all that would be fine, right? But it's another thing where the entire movie feels kind of weightless, where that doesn't feel like it is a big moment where you're like, oh shit, there's 6 other symbiotes.
He's a green one with a tail, like, oh my god.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, they're there. Moving on. And then whatever, and then plus also the scene where they all break out and they start grabbing people to start fighting back against the big monster. It also does not feel like this cool big moment that feels like it wants to or should, where like, I swear half of the guys who become symbiotes literally jump in this thing's mouth at certain points, right? Because like most of them throughout the fight are killed, and it seems like every time that happens, it's like they're like punching or shooting their little webs at the guy, and then they go, oh, time for me to die, and jump right into his waiting mouth so it can like become the grist that it shoots out of its back.
That was a cool effect. I will say that.
Yes. Yeah.
I think that was a payoff that either they just didn't have the budget for or something. I don't know. But I think that's where the 6 was supposed to be a thing as well, where
sure,
like they suicide squatted a bunch 6 willing symbiotes. I think that's kind of where it was supposed to go, but through the editing process and just like maybe budgetary means, they just decided, well, we can't have a team of symbiotes that work against Eddie and then just have them face turn, even though we're setting them up to be sympathetic by the end of the movie, so that way they can all team up with Eddie and Venom and fight the xenophages. There's just some kind of disconnect there, because it does feel like when the symbiotes break free and they like start latching onto people, it feels like it is supposed to be some kind of triumphant moment, but it feels more just like, oh, the new Power Rangers were selected, let's go with that. Because the symbiotes just, if they're not which I worked myself into a brain meld. The symbiotes just getting put through the xenophage grinder kills them,
right?
But they're goo. Like, why does that kill them and they can't just like reassemble themselves?
And I'm willing to accept maybe some of this is user error on my part. Maybe I'm just like I'm missing things. Maybe I'm not in the right headspace. Maybe I'm just a big dummy, or I'm whatever. But I swear there's at least once where a symbiote like gets eaten by one of those guys, and then it like relatches itself onto somebody. I'm like, wait, didn't that guy just get eaten? Or is there one that's a similar color? Maybe some of this is like bad CGI too, where it's like, to your Transformers point, sometimes you watch those movies and you're like, what the fuck is happening right now? Because these guys,
they all have the same Venom face. Like the only difference is like the eyes are maybe more lean instead of as big as like Venom's.
Yeah, and they're all different colors, to be fair.
Yeah, which generally, like the color grading when they're in the bunker at least kind of sucks, because there's one guy who I can't tell is like orange or brown, but he blends pretty well with the like chaos going on around them and like the brownish beige bunker and like the gunfire and everything. Like I was like, I don't know what color this guy's supposed to be, but he's a big thing looking dude.
Yeah. It's just a weird, and we have been talking for more than an hour at this point, not exclusively about this movie, not word one about the weird hippie family.
Oh, we need to talk about Rhys Ifans and the mom from Ted, whose name I don't have because I don't remember her character's name. I could look up Ted and find the mom, but I don't feel like it at this point. It's not entirely worth talking about. That also gave me vibes from the Joss Whedon cut of Justice League, where it's the Russian family that's hiding during the outbreak. They're the family that just kind of gives agency to do something beyond just fighting. And I do think that Rhys Ifans is having fun in this role.
Sure.
Like, he's probably like, I just need something different than Game of Thrones right now. So what do you got? And they're like, well, we have this hippie dad that needs to be in the Venom movies. Like, I'll take it.
Well, and it's another thing where the movie is sort of weird about what it's supposed to be about, right? Where we are doing a lot of sort of mid-2000s jokes about hippies, right? Where they don't eat anything with a face, haha, their kids hate them, haha. We're driving across the country and we love to sing bad songs together. But then also it swerves into this thing about now Eddie's feeling like what if he had a family? Does he regret not having a family? I don't think is foreshadowed at all it doesn't really come into play later. Like it's just a weird thing that's dumped in the middle of this like joke story. And then that is also the point where suddenly these characters aren't jokes anymore, except for when they give him like smelling hippie shoes or talking about how aliens suck or whatever. Like it's like a weird, it's just there's such a weird addition that I'm not sure, aside from what you said, where there are some normal people who have a stake in the outcome of this movie. I don't know what else we're doing. It's like just such a weird little subplot.
Yeah, there's something missing, because that whole sequence when they're in the van, it plays out and feels, at least to me, it plays out and feels like you're waiting for the xenophage to like just jump in front of them, or like some kind of quick jump scare, because it's such a weirdly sentimental moment that, like you said, kind of has no payoff. It's just there to kind of lay into Eddie being like, oh man, I could have had a family. And it like, maybe it's just trying to play up like which one of them is going to die. Like, is it going to be Eddie because he has no family and he wants Venom to survive? Some kind of thing like that. But it doesn't pay off anything. But I do want to segue really quick. Alana Ubach plays the hippie mom in this movie, and she again plays the mom in Ted. And while looking up her IMDb, she also plays Mama Imelda in Coco, which she's the one that sings La Llorona. That woman's got pipes. She can sing. She was apparently also in Waiting. She was like the foul-mouthed smoking server. It's like,
yeah, she's done a lot of work. Yeah. Like I didn't Ted just kind of hit some of the stuff for me, and the beauty of voice acting, because dang. But yeah, Alana Ubach plays the mom, and she does a great job. And I think with what she's given, like she pretty much exists just to be a hippie mom and like love her daughter. And again, I think there's more side story with that family that just never pays off. But one of the best tweets I saw after I watched this movie, just kind of, I was doing my research to see if there was post credits, how many post credits. I just, for whatever reason, I decided to go to Twitter just to see, like, I knew there was a possibility of video, and I just wanted to be like, let's just look for texts. And I just typed in Venom post credits. And one of the tweets I saw was, yes, there are 2 Venom post credits, but the most unbelievable thing about this movie is the fact that Area 51 is being decommissioned and there's only 5 people interested in this. Yes, right. They like are reporting on like the radio, and some of that's exposition, right? Where we're telling you what's happening, but also like, I'm old enough to remember when people gathered at Area 51 on the premise that they could Naruto run into Area 51. like this is a place that weirdos gather in, right?
It's a whole subplot in Independence Day.
Yeah. It's such a weird movie. And, we didn't even talk about the thing. And, I'm not necessarily someone who gets too hung up on characters acting out of character or whatever, right? But like there's a whole thing in this movie where we're constantly talking about, if we become Venom, the thing is going to find us. Venom's like, I can't be Venom. I can only be your shirt or whatever the fuck I am right now. And then,
I can't be your shoes though.
Yeah. And then 10 seconds later, the old lady from the convenience store is here.
Mrs. Chen. Yep.
And Venom's like, I want to dance. And then the monster shows up, and it's like, oh no, how could we have foreseen this happen? Well, you were literally just talking about how you can only be my shirt.
Which I will give the movie credit, because I think Eddie says, that thing's going to find us if we turn into Venom. And he's just like, I don't care. I need to dance. And they do a whole thing to Dancing Queen. And I think my biggest problem with that scene, because they do hang a lantern on it where Venom's just like, I don't give a shit. Like I want to hang out with Mrs. Chen for a minute. I think my biggest problem is the editing is just all over the place with that, because they're like on the stairs and then they're dancing on the ground and then they're back on the stairs and then they're on the balcony and then they're doing a Titanic thing. Like it's everywhere. Yeah. I would have preferred them do like maybe a one shot or do a proper musical sequence where you like follow them through a moment. Instead, it's just like, here's 2 seconds of this dance move. Here's 2 seconds of this dance move. Here's 5 seconds of this. Here's 3 seconds of them doing the lift. And now the monster is here.
It also really feels like it's only there, A, because we really want this character to show up in the movie at least once. And B, you get the sense that it's like, well, we don't really have a lot of funny Venom stuff, and that's kind of one of the things that people like about the first two. So we need a thing where he's doing something goofy, even though he's a big monster.
Yeah, he's not doing the DJ thing from the second movie, so we need something similar. Yeah, I don't think the gags work as well in this one. I think, again, it's because they're not working with what works for the characters. Like the DJ thing with Venom works really well because, like we said, it's a breakup comedy where Eddie and Venom are fighting, and Venom's kind of what's the word, like thought is I think is the new Gen Z term, where someone's just like openly promiscuous and just doing whatever they want because they're no longer bound by whatever. And so he's just like hopping from person to person, doing whatever the hell he wants in whatever form he wants. And in this case, he's a DJ decked out in a bunch of glow sticks. And like, it works. Like, that is probably the best scene in Venom too. And with this one, I just, the casino thing, it's funny because Venom gets addicted to gambling within 2 seconds and he spends all their $20, but there's no weight to what happened because it immediately just transitions into Mrs. Chen being like, I have all the money in the casino. They gave me a penthouse. Let's go up there and do a thing.
It's like a funny bit, but yeah, like you said, it's all part of the weightlessness of the movie. And the Vegas thing is also a weird part of it. And then maybe part of the thing as to why it feels like maybe half a movie, where this is like sort of set up as almost like a road trip movie, right? Where like the instigating thing is, Venom's wanted for murder, so we're going to go to New York City
and bribe a judge, or because like call in a favor.
Yeah, there's somebody I can blackmail. And I'm like,
that's out of jurisdiction as well, though.
Yeah, right. So it's like, okay, I mean, that could just be a bit, right? It doesn't have to be the plot of the movie, but it's like, that's very weird.
Yeah, it's the motivating factor to get them on the road. And I think that's where the movie kind of lost me, is like, okay, it's a road trip comedy, or it's a buddy road trip movie, but the road trip lasts like 5 seconds, and then they end up in Vegas, and then they got to go back to Area 51.
And it's also like, you're in Mexico. You're good. They're not going to find you. They're not going to come for you. You're in a different country,
Eddie doesn't want to live on the beach for whatever reason.
It's just a weird movie, and it feels like maybe that might have been more of the structure of the movie, possibly as originally intended. Like the thing is, it becomes what's intended to be a poignant moment where after Venom sacrifices himself to destroy the monsters, that he's talking about how he wants to see the Statue of Liberty all movie. Eddie Brock goes to New York. That's when we get our touching montage, which is mostly scenes from this movie, which is weird to me. There's
because it's the most sentimental of the three of them, even though no one has any attachment to it yet because the movie's not over.
Of course, yeah. But I mean, there's a couple things. It's weird because it's like 80% scenes from this movie, most of which we saw 10 minutes ago, and then like 1 or 2 from the first 2. And then he's like, buddy, I took you to Statue of Liberty after all, I told you. But it's just, it's a weird thing where I could imagine it being more of a, maybe that being the structure more, like they're on the go, and that's maybe, the buddy road trip is kind of the thing we're hanging a lantern on before the script got chopped to hell, or the movie itself got edited to fuck or whatever. So it's just a bunch of weird stuff that it feels like these weird cul-de-sacs that we're throwing out there and we're not really doing anything with.
Yeah, and I think the last thing we should talk about is the final conflict. We've kind of touched on it a little bit with the Venom team up with the other symbiotes, go Power Rangers, go Power Symbiotes, whatever. But I think you've said it a couple times now, the weightlessness of the movie, and just like how nothing really feels like it pays off, or there's no like sequential understanding of what's happening. That also happens in the final fight between the multiple xenophages that show up, where Eddie's just like, he gets hurt and Venom just kind of lets him linger in that pain for a while for some reason. Like, we know Venom can heal him, and they just have a quick little moment while Eddie is in searing pain from a gash in his side. And they're just like, oh man, I don't think we're getting out of this one, buddy. And then Venom's like, yeah, I know. And they have a moment. Venom heals him, and then Venom just detaches and like globs onto the xenophages and just starts pulling him towards the acid that they're using to melt away the existence of Area 51. And it's like, how did they know that was there? How does Venom know that Strickland's voice and eye signature are the only things that will activate the acid? none of this makes any sense because obviously we as the audience have seen this work, but Venom doesn't know that's there.
Sure. And, that's also, reality being no defense for fiction or whatever, but I don't think that is how. I think they would just abandon it. I don't think they would melt every item with a giant vat of acid if they were decommissioning an Air Force base.
Pretty sure like all the bunkers would be left alone. They would just lock it up and maybe leave a few people to guard it. But they would just take everything out and walk away.
Yeah, but you need a giant vat of acid for the end of the movie. So it's just a weird movie. I guess the main question, we talked about how the first two were not great, but they were fun to varying degrees. But I guess the question is like, do you think this one was fun at all?
I don't think it was fun. I think they took the wrong lessons from these things. And again, maybe they were too scared. Because I've seen a few different people, like Twitter's a cesspool. I'm not going to advertise our Twitter anymore. Like Alex might still post some things on there, but we're going to transition into like Threads or Instagram or Blue Sky. But like it's been established for 30 years that Eddie Brock and Venom are a they, them, because they are two separate entities that come together to form Venom. And the poster for Venom, The Last Dance says, "Till death do they part." And there have been a few different people, many different people who lean a certain way in the political spectrum, which you can guess where they go if they're fighting over pronouns, that think that this is a woke movie because they said "till death do they part," even though anyone who knows anything about fucking Venom, I should rephrase that, anyone who knows anything about Venom knows that it is two entities that make a person. Therefore you would call them they, because you don't refer to two people or more as you or him or she.
Yeah, that's the thing they're always screaming about too, where there's no singular they, which is not true, first of all, but this is a case where like it's two guys. It's two guys who are one guy, like that.
And they just happen to be extraterrestrial boyfriends.
Yeah. Till death do they part. I guess it's usually till death do us part, but till death do they part is like, that's the way you would say that phrase, because parting at death implies that there are two or more who are parting. It is a plural sentence.
Yes.
Dipshits.
It makes perfect sense, but I just it's one of those things. This is our last episode coming out before Election Day, so let's just say get out and vote. We'll just leave it at that. And also vote down your ballot. Don't just vote for the one big thing. Vote down the ballot. But like, I think the best way to say it is that, like you said, this movie is weightless. And I think they took the fun to actually answer your question. I think they took the fun in the wrong direction, where they, instead of focusing on the relationship between Eddie and Venom and like the shenanigans that creates, they focused more on, what if Venom was this? What if Venom was that? What if Venom latched onto this animal? What if Venom latched onto that animal? Instead of it being, what if Venom gets Eddie into this situation? How would Venom respond if Eddie walked him into this situation? Or how would they react in this situation together? Which we get a little bit of when they free some dogs that were kidnapped and were being trained to be fighting dogs when they're in Mexico. That scene was, I think that was probably the most fun scene in the movie. I think the best gag in the movie is when the family is trying to get out of Area 51 after the whole escalation of the final fight works its way outside, and Reese Ifans' character's like, "Eddie, it's me, Martin."
Yeah,
like he's like pointing to his face, like, "How could you forget this guy?" And like, "Yeah, I saw you like 2 hours ago, man." I think taking away the buddy comedy of the movie takes away from the fun factor, because I think that's a really easy way to relate to people. But instead they focused on the novelty of, oh, look, a Venom frog. Oh, look, a Venom horse. Oh, look, a Venom fish. And then I think the credits sequence is a lot of fun. Like, oh, I never thought of like what an orca Venom would look like. Like it makes perfect sense that would be a thing, but that's kind of cool looking.
Yeah. It's very funny that you can almost tell, I think the scene where Venom is hopping around is fun. That is a fun scene, but it is just one scene, but you can tell like I don't know if that's like where, obviously it's not where all of their energy went because it's one scene in the movie, but I think the fact that the credits are apparently like CG renders of what I would assume are just a bunch of preliminary sketches. They thought, like, oh, what if we put this in the movie? Oh, we can't find a room for an orca venom, whatever. But we have the illustration.
We're in the middle of a desert. Where's an orca going to come from?
Yeah, right.
Like
but
that's the one logical leap that they can't make.
Yeah, but then the credits become here's all the renders of like here's Venom as a crow, here's Venom as a dog, and all that stuff. You can tell that was something they were really interested in. But yeah, like I think it's a movie that has like fun moments, and it does have some cool, like, in terms of CG and like smashing the action figures together, it's got some cool bits of that, right? But I think ultimately, like what you're saying is like it doesn't have sort of like the heart of the first two movies, and that's the thing that I think kind of fails it. And we've said that a bunch already, but the core of it being the sort of fun shenanigans of this odd couple, and the way that that filters through some serious stuff. Like, in the second movie, it's serial killer carnage, but we're still having fun with it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it kind of gets lost in this one, whether that's because a lot of the movie got cut out, or they're trying to be this big epic conclusion, ? Or what. I don't know why, but it kind of doesn't do the thing that these movies were good at very well, I think.
That puts it perfectly, I think. To put in the Talking SMAC rating, I would say this is a pass, even though apparently a bunch of people really wanted to see this movie. $175 million at the global box office. I think it's a pass. I can't say I recommend this one, especially when there's two other ones that I think are more fun.
Yeah, honestly, if you happen to catch it whenever it hits whatever streaming app it's going to hit, honestly, if not for the combination of, oh, I've got a Thursday afternoon free, plus the opportunity to show up to be here, I don't know that I would have gone out of my way to see it in the theater,
And like I said, I felt like I owed it to myself as with something that I was doing with the podcast back when we first started back in 2017, and all the shit I talked about this franchise, that it now has 3 films in it, and it's made over $1 billion at the global box office, almost 1.5 billion. It's pretty intense and unfathomable. If you would have asked me back in 2018 if there was a trilogy of Venom movies, I would have said like, oh yeah, that'll happen in like 2030 when Marvel gets the rights back. But I think with that, we've kind of touched on most everything that there is to talk about this movie. We've talked almost as long as the movie has gone on, so you can take that one to the bank with all that. Matt, if you want to be so kind, let everyone know about our Discord.
Yeah, we have a Discord server, and it is basically this, but in text form. So if you like us complaining, being real dorks and nitpicking shit to death and want to join in, then come on by. We'd love to have you.
Yeah, you can find the link to our Discord in the episode description below. You can find us at Talking SMAC Pod on all social media platforms. That includes Blue Sky, Instagram, Threads, Hive Social, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok. Email us your thoughts, opinions, concerns about anything going on with the podcast or things you've been watching. We've got a What You Doing coming up. Next week, I believe we will be talking about Next week, we'll be talking about Agatha All Along. And so if you're watching along, let us know what you think of the show, and we'll read your thoughts on air. Thank you to Leo Allen for musical themes, Beppo for original avatars, Retro Ale Studios for our Ricky avatar. Please like, subscribe, rate, review on your podcatcher of choice. If you're listening on YouTube, leave a like, leave a comment. But most importantly, Matt, thank you so much for being here and taking the time to go see Venom 3.
Always a pleasure.
And also thank you, dear listener, for taking the time to listen to us rant about all these comic book, superhero nonsense, blockbuster things. It's always fun. We look forward to doing it again. And it also, next Wednesday is our episode, the day before Election Day. Get out and vote. But take care until then, and we'll see you on the other side of the election process.
watch Star Trek. Lower Decks is back. Just watch it. It's good.
Who loves SMAC?
I love SMAC. Is it true? Mm-hmm. I do.